Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of our brand new show, Talk Landscape, brought to you by ThinkLandscape at the Global Landscapes Forum. My name is Andrea, and I'll be your host for today. But before we get started with this session, I want to ask you a few questions, and feel free to answer them in the chat on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, wherever you're watching. So, I want to know from you, from our audience, what is your favorite forest? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What do you feel there? Is there a patch of forest or greenery close where you live? Or do you have to go far to access and connect with nature? Today, we're going to explore what urban forests can do for us and why we need more forests in the cities of the future. We've got an amazing lineup of guests to help us unpack key questions such as what urban forests can contribute to the future of sustainable, climate-resilient cities, communities that are connected to nature and can actually benefit from being close to forests across the globe. And as we go, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. So we'd love to hear what you have to say. I want to open up with our first guest. So Preecha Ongprasert is the chair of the Regional Model Forest Network for Asia. And hi, Preecha, welcome to the show. You've been working with the intersection of cities and forestry for decades. But first, help us understand a little bit, what exactly is an urban forest?
Hello, MJ, and hello, everyone. That is a very good opportunity for me to join this session. So when we're talking about the urban forestry is something like we mentioned about the tree and any vegetation that they growing within the city area. But the definition will be vary from maybe region to region or country to country. For example, in the European countries, that urban forests mean that any kind of the trees that growing in the urban areas, but it will be includes some kind of the woodland, especially in Great Britain. But in the United States, a little bit different with the definition of the urban forestry. In the United States, may include some of the street trees and the a tree that grow into the private areas. So like a backyard garden as well or something like that. But anyway, within the urban area, when we consider into the stand of the tree, we call the stand of the trees like a composing of the many kind of species. We call the urban stand. But when we consider into individual trees, so they have they have another definition. We will not call it as the urban tree or individual urban tree. We call it the management as the arboriculture. Arboriculture is it mean that something like we manage the tree, take care of the trees, watering the tree, something like that to make the tree in a good health. There are people who do it with the individual trees that we call arborists. That's the general view and the perspective of the urban forestry. And the another definition I gave to you as arboriculture.
Awesome. But I want to follow up with one quick question about urban forest, Preecha. How big does it have to be? And how does it have to be all in one place? Does it have to be connected? Or can it be spread out throughout the city? What makes a patch of green qualify as urban forest?
That is very good. We have that to go into the definition of the urban forests. Urban forests, as I already explained it, that any kind of the tree growing within the cities. So sometimes that we can see is that in developed area, the tree could not grow in a big stand. They have a lot of fragmentation because of they have intervention of the developed area. Maybe from it will be divided by the road system, transportation system like that. The urban policy is sometimes that we have to manage from side to side. But anyways, that we try to connect it together. The way we connect together, we call the green corridor, that to connect the urban tree together. We can see a lot of example within the developed country like Singapore. Then they try that to connect all the city park together. Like in Thailand, that we also that give the link of the green area together by using the green corridor. So it means that the size of urban policies that could not define because it
Mhm.
depends on the circumstance of each of the area or each of the country.
Thanks, Preecha. So basically, what you're telling me is that urban forests can look very differently across the world. And
Yep.
right now, over half of the world's population lives in cities. And this number is set to double by 2050. I think we're going to be reaching uh, a point where nearly 7 out of 10 people are going to be living in cities.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define the role
Yep.
of urban forests in this scenario? What kind of policies do we need for urban forestry
Mm-hmm.
to be implemented where cities are increasingly pressured by development?
Okay, that's a very good question. Urban forestry is that in general mean that okay, it can yield a lot of benefit to the people. The thinking about that can reduce the heat that we call the heat island effect. That's the accumulated of the heat during the daytime that they can raise up the temperatures within the cities during the daytime up to 5 degrees. So the urban forestry that can shape the cities and reduce the or mitigate the ambient temperature. But anyways, that when we talk about the beneficials that we get from urban forestry, it really depends on the circumstance and the city, the country as well. In developed
Sorry.
countries,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
urban forestry it means beautification and but in developed countries so we have that to focus on how that people can survive or enhance of the livelihood of the people in African country urban forestry is mean that it is source of food or the fodder that can bring that to make a enhancement of the livelihood development something like that. But anyway, so sometimes that within the natural disaster that used to happen in the 1970, that
Mm-hmm.
when it happened, a big earthquake in Beijing or in China, then the government of China on that time they cut down the tree, the big tree that they grow along the city or in the park, that to build a shelter for the people who got the impact from the disaster. That is the example. But anyway, that within the big city like in the northern European countries, the urban forestry can sell some product like a timber to the market as well. By the way, we can say is that like now urban forestry that give a lot of beneficial to the people. We couldn't define it certainly, but as I mentioned, it depends
Mm-hmm.
on the circumstance of each country.
Absolutely, Preecha. Thank you so much for that, because that lets me pivot to our guest, Tara Tiger Brown from the University of British Columbia. She's bringing expertise on the intersection of environmental health and urban forestry. So, Tara, now that Preecha has shared with us the huge benefits of forest in cities for climate mitigation, for resilience against disasters, and also to contribute to local economies, what are other benefits that people and communities can get from forests?
So many benefits. Specifically, with my research, I was looking at psychological and physiological health benefits. And so, spending time in green spaces and forests can improve mood, reduce depression. It can offer reduced heart rate and blood pressure, so improved cardiovascular health. Also, something that's not really discussed a lot is really addressing the sort of epidemic of loneliness that many people are facing in cities, because it can create sort of social cohesion in green spaces. So, for example, one of the practices that I researched and that I'm a guide for is called forest bathing. That was based out of Japan from the early 80s. And with forest bathing, when it's guided, you're in a group. And this offers sort of a way to not only connect with the forest through all of your senses, but also with the other people in your group. And so it's just an easy way outside to be able to spend time on your own, reflecting, but also getting to know other people in your community.
That's wonderful. And can you tell us some examples of like cities that are doing things right in terms of implementing these practices? Because you've had a very interesting journey, Tara. I was initially familiar with you from your presentation at the IUFRO 2024 conference. So could you briefly share with us your journey? What brought you to studying the amazing benefits of being connected to nature, and then lead with some examples of cities that are doing it right?
Okay. Well, briefly, so I lived in Shibuya, Tokyo, Japan, which is one of the most dense cities on the planet. And Tokyo actually has the same population as all of Canada, where I am now. So when I was living in Shibuya, I was a tech startup entrepreneur. I was very stressed out all the time. And this was at the same time that two books came out about forest bathing in English, so by Dr. Lee and Dr. Miyazaki. So I ended up speaking to both those researchers, and then I then went on to practice, learn about forest bathing from Dr. Lee as part of the International Society of Nature and Forest Medicine. And it was really just out of curiosity about this practice. But what I found pretty quickly was how relaxed I felt, and just how this really simple practice of just being in the forest can offer so many benefits. And so when I was there, I was thinking, could this possibly work back home in Vancouver, BC, Canada? Because, it's a very different demographic, forest, culture, religions, all sorts of things. And because I was wondering, was it really about, in Japan, there's most of the population there is affiliated with Shintoism and Buddhism, for example, where it's very different in Vancouver, where there's a variety of religions. And I thought, is that the reason? Is that why we're feeling more connected to nature through this more sort of indigenous religion? So I left being a tech entrepreneur and I went back home to Vancouver, BC to pursue my PhD to research forest bathing in Metro Vancouver, BC. So my study was it was a year-long study across all 4 seasons, from the rain to the snow. And we measured participants, their blood pressure and heart rate and mood, and also nature connectedness. So this is something else which is really interesting, is despite practices like forest bathing or other nature-based interventions, it's not usual to actually measure how connected people feel to nature. So I wanted to bring that into the conversation. And so that's where I just finished my PhD and a couple months ago, and here we are.
Amazing.
Yeah, so you wanted me to answer, I think, cities that I think are doing it right. I think the first thing is, having access to green space is obviously the first thing. And as you were mentioning, the population is increasing. And so that means housing, right? Housing means you're losing your green space, you're losing your tree canopy cover. And so cities that have really bold plans to figure out a balance between housing and also increasing their tree canopy cover and their green space, I think, are doing it right. So 2 examples of that here in Metro Vancouver, where I am. They're trying to increase their tree canopy and green space, I think, to around at 32 to 40% by 2050. Melbourne is another place that is trying to increase to 40% in the next couple of decades. So that's the first thing. But it's not just about green space and tree canopy on public spaces. It's also those cities that are working with property owners, right? Because the urban forest includes private property, and so having those conversations is really important. But also not just talking about trees. So when you also have to think about biodiversity. There's a really fun project in Vancouver where I am called the Butterfly Way, where they work with community members across the city to grow pollinator gardens for butterflies and bees and other insects, so that there's literally this flyway for them to connect throughout the city. Accessibility is really important also, because the closer you are to accessing your green spaces, the more likely it is that you're going to frequent them, and this improves, there's more likely that you'll maybe exercise, for example. This might also reduce obesity, improve mood, all those things. That's important. But they also have to meet individuals' needs as well. So one example, in Los Angeles, they are really prioritizing the urban forest. So they recently hired a chief urban forester who's talking with residents to say, what kind of trees do you like? How do you see this forest working for you? And Los Angeles is not a place that you think of an urban forest. I live there, and there are actually forests there. The last example I want to share is, going back to needs as well, is so, when you think of, everybody has a different idea when they think of a park, right? So maybe you play baseball or soccer and you're thinking of, well, you need a park to play sports.
Yeah.
Or perhaps you have a dog and you want to take your dog to the park. So, it's very difficult to meet everybody's needs. And so maybe you have a park nearby, but it doesn't meet your needs. So for me, I'm always looking for a place to hang out under some trees and with some shade. But that's not necessarily always near me. In Shibuya, Tokyo, there's this really fantastic park that's 2 levels. So on the bottom level, it's a sports field. And then you go up to the second level and it's a park, and it has community gardens, it has wellness features, and you can look down on the soccer field. So it's like a really cool way of their multiple level park that meets many, many needs.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tara, for such a great overview. I also am really curious to hear from the audience whether your city is doing it right. I see people joining us from Cameroon, joining from Nigeria. How is it going in your cities where you're joining from? Do you have easy access to green spaces? Let us know in the chat. And now I want to go ahead with Dewikti, who is joining us from Panama. And thank you so much for joining this conversation, Dewikti, once we get you on screen. There you are. So you are an advocate for sustainability, and you're a Guna member of the Panama Caribbean Coast and indigenous community. And you bring a unique perspective to conservation and climate challenge by blending indigenous knowledge with sort of global expertise, advising NGOs, advising public and private sector. First, Dewikti, Tara mentioned some concepts around social cohesion, nature connectedness. She even mentioned some experiences with indigenous religions. So I want to ask you, Dewikti, can you share why you think it's important to connect traditional ancestral knowledge with the way that we think about the future of the cities?
Of course, I think it's very important to recognize the relationship that indigenous peoples have had with environment and nature for centuries. Um, Most of the people now are living in urban settings, but there is also this connection that is being lost because we are not surrounded by nature anymore. And I think that connection, that lack of connection, is what's causing the biggest problems that we have right now in terms of pollution and biodiversity lost. So, giving the opportunity to bridge indigenous knowledge and more Western science have um, many advantages. And I think that especially indigenous ways of knowing, rooted in deep ecological understanding, reciprocity, and respect for land, offer valuable guidance for reimagining cities as living, breathing ecosystems rather than disconnected built environments. So for us, for indigenous people, we are part of nature, and we don't see us as something apart from it. Um, so we wouldn't hurt it because it would be like hurting ourselves or hurting a family member. Since we are a child, we are taught that both trees, plants, and animals are our siblings, and that we are as human beings, we have been created to basically protect them and take care of them. So when we cut a tree, for example, to make a canoe or a boat, we ask for permission to that tree before we cut it, and there is a special ceremony that happens before we use plants or flowers or barks of trees for making medicine. So that special connection, if was practiced by people everywhere in the world, will make a big difference.
Thank you so much to Wigdy for sharing the importance of being connected with nature and how to incorporate that. Now let's bring it back to your experience in advising organizations in the public and private sector in bringing these practices into global dialogues. How is can you give us some examples of cities or regions that have successfully incorporated these practices into urban planning, or sustainable tourism?
Sure. um, there are many examples of cities that are moving mass tourism, or shopping tourism, experience focus and center. Panama is one of them, and now are more focused on developing experiences that are based on both cultural and natural heritage. And when you mix these two things, you get something called biocultural heritage that doesn't only include nature and culture, but also the landscapes around these experiences. So Panama, especially in the last 20 years, have focused on developing a public policy that allows for indigenous peoples, black people, and other minorities to integrate into tourism development. And their understanding of nature and their relationship with their forest is being used as a base for creating new products and tourism experiences. Booking.com, TripAdvisor, the biggest tourism engines online are talking about how sustainability is shaping the patterns of the consumers, especially after the pandemics. People want to visit places that have nature, that can allow them to learn something from nature, and that can also make them feel that they are getting back to not only the community but also the environment. So it will increase more and more if countries and cities want to um, maintain their status and become not only more responsible, but also they can get a huge economic benefit out of protecting their forests, protecting their people, and showcasing how this relationship is positive in a world of climate change and biodiversity loss.
Now, you made a very important point on increasing the resilience of cities in the face of extreme weather events, climate crisis, and so on. Now, I want to bring this into consideration for Preecha. Preecha, what can you tell us from your perspective, working with the International Model Forest Network, the Regional Model Forest Network, in terms of incorporating and working with local communities to improve the resilience of cities?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. So, actually, for the regional model forest network Asia, mostly they're not considered or focused so much into the urban forestry because most of them still are working with the rural urban landscape. No, no, rural landscape. Sorry, but within Thailand, that where I proposed the idea that to propose urban forestry as the one of the site for the model forest because it will be different from other member. So I'm now that working with the one project in the south of Bangkok. The area is around 2,000 hectare in total. The area composes around 70% of the vegetation covers and very, very close to Bangkok. We started the project around 15 years ago, starting that to encourage the local people, around 20,000 people living over there, to start to preserve the area as a cleaning. And then right now it's really successful. So we can find the indicator that can point out that the area is already becoming the very rich of biodiversity. For example, when I was the manager of the city park over
Mm-hmm.
there in the years of 2007, we made the inventory for the bird species. On that time, we found just only 70 species of the bird that on that time. But after that, continue us for conserving the area and plant more of the variety of the trees, including the fruit tree to attract the birds. Right now, we found in double around 135 species coming back, including the last species. And a good one is that another biodiversity is the firefly. On that 2007, we found only three species of the firefly. Firefly is to show for the good environment. They have the, they have to stay in the very clean water on that, and then they can survive. But after 15 years of the conserving, right now we found five species, and two species is the one new record species. So it's very good, and we also promote for the ecotourism. We set up the first urban community forestry of the country with over there in the years of 2012. Then right now it's becoming the very pinpoint for the tourism. A lot of the tourists going over there. So I would like to show some of the example that we can develop the urban forestry to be a good site for the people, not only for living, economic enhancement, but also for the tourism uh, destination as well that we would like to highlight.
Thank you so much for such a nice wrap up of what's already being shared by Tara and Dwiti, Preecha. I want to highlight some of the amazing comments that we're getting from the audience because we want to ask you where you're joining from, how do you reconnect with nature. I see Kara is joining from Kenya, and they love the Olulua Forest in Kajiado County. Tell us more, please. I'm really curious about this forest. What makes it so special for you? I also want to highlight Jonathan Hardin, who is joining from Freetown, Sierra Leone. We've talked about this interesting project called Freetown, the Tree Town, in our recent article on ThinkLandscape on the most sustainable cities in the global south. So we're going to drop a link to that article in the chat because you're going to learn about Freetown, in Sierra Leone. You're going to learn about some examples in Colombia, in Brazil, and other cities in the global south that are taking positive steps towards sustainability. So it's amazing to hear that everyone joining here in the chat is aware of what's going on in their cities. We also see I found an interesting message. Yeah, someone else who is giving a shout out to Ololua Forest. Maybe we should visit. Amazing. And I see someone who is running a library within the forest and reading within the forests, which makes this person reunite and reconnect with nature. Thank you so much. Okay, I need to highlight this other comment from Fiji. You've been promoting this topic in Fiji. It's definitely not easy. Okay, thanks for tuning in, Deborah. Now, I
wanted to actually mention I love the reading in the forest comment, because it reminded me of a project that I've been working on called Silent Trails. And it's a place that people go and read. There's a sort of movement around silently reading in groups, or it's around the world. And so this is one of the places that people are doing it, or in forests. So I just absolutely love that.
Thanks so much for jumping in, Tara, because I do have a question for you. I wanted to ask you, sorry, I forgot my question. Oh yeah, what are these different practices that we can do to reconnect in a forest? You mentioned already silent trails, and I was looking into your research and your website. You have some interesting projects like the sit down club, and could you tell us a bit more on what are some practices, what are some ways that we can reconnect with nature in new creative ways?
Well, I recently came across a research paper that has found over 130 nature-based interventions across 34 countries since the 80s. It really, in terms of like in academics, they were first looking at outdoor recreation, taking youth to the forest, as sort of the early research studies, and it's really expanded since then. Now it's everything from forest bathing, like I mentioned, but it can be horticulture, gardening, just hanging in a hammock. I mean, really, it is absolutely everything. There's more focus now on blue spaces, which I think is great. So for my study sites, for example, I always incorporate green space and blue space, meaning it could be a pond, a creek, the ocean, for example. And so, it's really any practice. In fact, there was a really fun study in Japan where they had a research participants pretend that they were plants. So it was sort of like this inverse thing, like what would it be like if I was a plant and humans were interacting with me? So really like trying to think in different ways about how to reconnect with nature, if that's something you want to do. But so the answer is, it's as creative as you want to be. What we do know though is if you bring the natural environments to the foreground instead of it being a background is really important. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're going for a walk in the park or the forest, and it's like a place you're walking through, right? You're like, yay, I'm walking through, but you're really maybe not paying attention to the forest, or you're chatting with a friend or a family member that you're with. So pausing to use all of your senses that are available to you to really engage with the forest in an intentional way, not just passively, but like really mindfully doing that. And so it can be, like I said, in a garden, it can be with a street tree, it can be with a plant that's hanging out on your desk right now or behind you that I see. All of those are ways to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tara. And I want to save that last comment for later, because I do want to ask you to maybe run us through a quick forest connection exercise. But let's save that for later, because I want to touch upon a very important topic that was mentioned in the chat, which is environmental education. Let's start with you, Preecha. What is the role of education in the work with the Regional Model Forest Network, especially in cities?
Yes, that's another good question from you. Thank you. So Lately, the FAO already published the research about how the people like the new generation is quite far away from education of environment. So it says in the report that because of the curriculum that within the primary school or even kindergarten is not focused much within the education of environment. So it means that whenever the new generation grow up, they are quite away from the environment surround them. Then right now, within the regional model forest network Asia, we have a good collaboration with the FAO and the Busan University in Korea. We started to implement the program we call the edutainment. Edutainment is mean that we will organize the area within the urban green space
Mm-hmm.
to enhance the activity, encourage the young people that to stay outside, that to learn from the outdoor classroom, to spend more time within the open space, something like that. And the school is starting that to add environmental curriculum that into the daily of the studying in the primary and the kindergarten. So it means that right now, even that we still have the people working with the urban forestry, but if we have not do anything, so it means that in the future we couldn't find more people to support the idea how that to we maintain urban forestry program. So that is my idea.
What about you, Tara? Because you have been working with projects related to environmental education throughout your journey. What are your key insights in developing educational tools and working with the youth to connect with nature?
I'm a big fan of community science, or neighborhood science. Sometimes it's called citizen science, sort of depending on, where what your focus is. But the just getting kids outside of the classroom and out, and into nature and doing experiments, being kids, I think is just really just supporting that, because sometimes that curiosity, is not fostered very well. So I see a lot of great projects around that. There's the iNaturalist app, for example, where you can go and take pictures of insects or animals or plants or whatever, and it helps you identify them. But then there's a whole community behind that to help you also identify it. There's a program called Globe, it's a global program, which I support. They have this wonderful international science fair that I've been a judge for. And this is also sort of similar to community science, but this gets kids learning about how to measure weather or tree canopy. They work with NASA, for example, to take measurements on the ground. And then, NASA has their satellites over top so that they can help measure the tree canopy cover around the globe. Or even like mosquitoes, measuring mosquitoes, right? So that they can be such a health risk. So like, I think the thing is, kids can get involved really early to think about how they can support what's happening, with the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, etc. This is something that they should be involved in, and that really starts with their curiosity and fostering that as early as you can. And like the last thing I want to say, that's something that I really want to see more of, is just teaching kids plant identification. I think about this all the time, right? Like when I moved back to Vancouver, and I did full vegetation surveys on all the trails for my research, and I had to go back to school to like identify the plants, that I grew up with here. And there are plants that I found out I could eat that I had no idea I could. Even my mom, she's like, "No, you can't eat that plant. Are you crazy?" I'm like, "No, Mom, you can. I'm telling you." And so just like, this is a generational issue, really. You learn that something is not healthy for you, or it's dangerous, and then that just persists across generations. And so kids should know what their plants are, what the animals are, what the insects are in their neighborhood. And then I believe that this also will help them become really wonderful nature stewards.
Wonderful. Now, Diwigdi, we lost you for a minute, but let me do a quick recap for you and for the audience who are just joining. We're talking about the role of environmental education and kind of fostering being more connected to nature among the youth. Tara mentions this is a generational issue, and Preecha also mentions how important it is to educate young children, to work with kindergarteners, to foster more of this connection with nature. What can you share from your perspective? Any insights from your community?
There is very cool, and I think that it's something that not only the Kuna people in Panama does, but also other indigenous groups. When you are born and after you lose your umbilical bottom, that piece of cord that remains when you're a baby, that cord is put with a seed and planted into a tree, normally a fruit tree that will grow up with you. So that tree is like your brother, and these kind of practices, as um, you were saying before, really make an impact in your life because, as we were mentioning in the beginning, you see yourself as part of nature and not as something separate and as something that doesn't relate to you in any way.
This is so beautiful, Duity, and it also reminds me of these practices that are more and more frequent of people who decide to turn their remains into a forest once they are cremated, and kind of bring the whole cycle to some sort of closure, and start with being connected to nature, start our lives connected to nature, and end them in the same way. I'm also super curious from the chat to see if there are any tips, and I see some people sharing that we all need that serene place that we can find in nature, and to use. We see someone reminding us to use our libraries because books come from trees. Absolutely, yeah. We need to bring this cycle more closer to us. But anyway, let's bring everything back to our main topic. Yeah, now back to you, Tara. Sorry. What cities are leading the way in creating green spaces that promote well-being? You shared some really interesting examples, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into the research that you've been conducting in Vancouver. What are some of the learnings that you have observed from studying the benefits of city dwellers who are more connected to nature?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So my sample were participants 20 to 86 years old. And so, we measured, like I mentioned, cardiovascular health and also mental health and nature connectedness. And so the participants went forest bathing, which is essentially immersing yourself in the forest, right? And it's a very slow practice. It's an intentional practice. And comparing going on their own to being in a group, so more social. And so across the two interventions, heart rate went down, mood improved, and nature connectedness increased. So that's the good news, because some of the differences were really that they described were that they liked being on their own because it gave them sort of more freedom and time for reflection, but they liked being in a group because it was more educational and structured. So if you just tell me what to do, that was really good. But some of the sort of the sub-analysis was showing that participants that lived the longest near the park that they had their intervention in, their forest bathing, they had higher nature connectedness than the groups that, were maybe newer to an area. Participants that had never gone forest bathing before had lower feelings of nature connection than those that had done it previously. And they all increased afterwards. But I think it just goes to show that, either it's repeated, nature immersion, or just the, anticipating that you're going to do it provides benefits. The other thing was, so I had 4 study sites. 3 were in the city, and 1 was in a peri-urban forest that was about an hour away from the city. And it was much quieter, as you would expect. But the difference really between like the 3 cities and that forest being quieter was there was improved mood in that quieter forest. And so, and there were a lot of complaints from participants in the cities, like, oh, I can hear the traffic, or there's always aircraft overhead, that sort of thing. I mean, they were still getting benefits and they'd find quiet spaces, but it was definitely more, they noticed those human noises much more in the cities. But I think it's partly because when you're quiet and you're slow and you're really opening up your senses to the environment, all of a sudden you're noticing these things, and you might be thinking, I should be hearing birds right now. And that's what you're hoping for. And so this was when, I developed Silent Trails, was because I realized that we have all these wonderful parks in Vancouver, across Metro Vancouver, but they are for hiking and biking and horseback riding and dog walking. But there weren't any trails just to hang out and be in nature and not be, bombarded with, somebody on there listening to their music, or, driving or riding their bike really fast down, just like calm place where you can listen to the natural soundscape, because that's not something that's really talked about a lot, right? We talk about green space, we talk about trees, but just listening to the soundscape is so important. And if you listen to any sound ecologist, what they're saying is how much we are losing the ability to just hear nature sounds. Like, they have to take a long time now when they're out there recording in the field to get anything that's just wildlife without any human noise behind it. So that's something that I really hope that, we're talking about landscapes, but can we bring in soundscapes to that conversation? Because just like biodiversity, it's all connected.
And now, Preecha, I want to ask you whether you have done any studies or have any insights on the benefits of being connected to urban forests for city dwellers in Asia.
Yes. Within my project site in Bang Krachao, in the south of Bangkok, it's just about 50 kilometers away from the city center of Bangkok. So around 5 years ago, we got one of the projects supported by the Chinese government, that one of the activities we implement the program running the school curriculum with the local community in primary school. And then we took them that 3 days in a week that to have the classroom, sitting under the shade of the tree. And then we got the response and the feedback from the teachers. They said that all students have much more of the concentration. And then every of the classroom that can be finished very soon. And it's just something like the point or the mark when they're getting the examination is a little bit higher. Maybe because it's just a short activities, less than 1 year. Then we wish that to extend the program. Maybe it can enhance some of the EQ of students in the future. We don't know that. We have to make more of the research on that. Another program that we joined the program with the Psychiatric Institute in Bangkok. We tried the program with the how we would like to see that if the clean area can help the people that recover from the operation quickly. And then to help to mitigate some of the stressful of the people who coming within the to have the treatment with the psychiatric institute like that. So then we start the program for more than 3 years like now. It's then the result is quite very positive. So we still continue that with the institutes that to study more in the near future. Maybe the result can be published to the public soon.
Absolutely. We are excited to hear more about that. Now, I want to ask you, Dewigdi, from your experience as a co-founder of Body Hostels, so you work in sustainable tourism, and in a way, what you try to do is bring in those benefits to travelers in a sustainable way, in a way that connects us more to nature. How do you do this? How do you try to connect travelers to nature through sustainable tourism? How does that work for you?
When people start tourism businesses, normally they either do it because they have an opportunity, because they have a building already, or like a space that they can accommodate for receiving visitors. But there is a lot of thinking that has to be actually put into creating a tourism experience or a hotel. So you have to start even from the designer stage, like what materials you are going to use, and what message the whole structure of where people is going to sleep sends. So in Panama, we started this hostel chain almost 11 years ago already.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, the main focus was always to show people and show travelers that you could stay in a place that was clean, that has a really high standard of service, but that was also built with recycled materials and was made basically all by hand. And we have focused on developing this hostel chain in destinations that have a high content or high nature
Mm-hmm.
integrity, but also places that have a community that is somehow working towards the protection of that environment. The first hostel we opened was in a place called El Valle Anton in Panama. It's a place surrounded by mountains, waterfalls, and hikes. And every day we would take the tourist on a hike to visit a waterfall. And I remember doing that for 8 months in a row when we opened. And we have kept those experiences in all the destinations we have. And in Panama City, for example, we organize walks to the highest mountains in the city. So it's a guided walking tour that takes you around the city, but also connects you with the nature that is just meters away from you, that people normally don't
Exactly.
know.
So I really would like to dive a little bit deeper with Tara on how we can bring the forest experience to our daily lives, whether it's for students, for people working in an office, for remote workers, digital nomads. How can we all harness the benefits of forests? So, Tara, if I may, I want to ask you if you could maybe give us a quick nugget of wisdom, a quick exercise, something that we can all do right now to feel more connected to nature, or to harness the benefits of forests and nature.
Okay, well, I'm going to include sort of a question here, and then I'll end with an activity.
We're all yours.
Okay, so when was the last time that you truly listened to a forest or a natural space? And I don't mean just being physically present, but consciously opening up your senses to what it might be communicating. So many participants in my study discovered that the longer they remained still and quiet, the more that the creatures and nature came to life. So this suggests that our relationship with nature isn't just about what we extract from it. So I talked about, kind of getting health benefits from it or stress reduction, but it's about reciprocity and dialogue. So I invite you to consider, how might your relationship with the natural environments around you, whether it's a plant, on your desk, or your street tree outside, or your garden, change if you approach them not as passive settings, but as active participants in a conversation. And what might you learn if you gave a forest or even a single tree the same quality of attention that you'd give to a friend or a family member? And so something that you can do even in less than a minute is if you have a plant nearby, or if you see a tree outside your window, is just take a moment and just notice it. And then notice yourself for a second, and just like your breath, just being present in the moment that you're in. And then using the available senses, just get curious. Just remember being a kid when you're really super curious. Touch the texture if it's safe, smell it, listen to the sounds around you. And maybe there's human sounds in there too, but just notice as much as you possibly can. And then if you can, just repeat that. So if you can find what we call a sit spot, something where it's easily accessible to you, where you can sit even just for 5 minutes and just go through that practice and create that relationship, then notice what that means for you. Maybe you have a new tree friend or a new plant friend.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tara. And I also added it in the screen so people can keep that reflection for later, because we are about to wrap up this conversation today. And yeah, I just want to give everyone the space to share any key takeaways from today's session. Very, very brief takeaways, starting with you, Preecha, from your perspective of working for decades with urban forestry, in leading the model forestry network in Asia. What is your takeaway from today?
So I would like to say is that for um, the global climate change or anything that can be mitigated by our hands, then we join the hand together that to solve the problem. The really easiest way, cheapest way is to plant the tree. You can plant the trees in any time of the day, any event that you can celebrate by planting the tree. So it can help. It's really easy. That's
Thank you
it.
so much, Preecha. Over to you, Dewey. What are your key takeaways from today, from your perspective?
For me, it's surprising that even though we are so apart, there is a common language that's it started to being discussed and talked. So we have people in Asia, North America, and the Caribbean here, but also online, so many people from other parts of the world. And I think that this kind of dialogue has to happen more and more to realize that we are not working or being alone in this fight. We all know how difficult it is, and we probably had personal relationships with these topics in different levels. But it's very healing to see how people in other parts of the world are also with the same mentality.
Wonderful, Dewey. Over to you, Tara. What is one key message that you'd like to share with us today?
I think it's about community. When we think about community, it's not just the people in our neighborhood, it's that urban forest around us. And if we can show respect for that as we do each other, I think the world will just be a much better place.
Thank you so much to the three of you. I'm so happy to have been able to host this episode of Talk Landscape. I want to thank everyone watching for your insights, for sharing this hour with us. And yeah, let's continue this conversation. Thank you once again to Preecha Ongprasert, Chair of the Regional Model Forest Network for Asia, to Diwik Valiente, climate activist from the Guna people of Panama, and to Tara Tiger Brown from the University of British Columbia Forestry Faculty. Thank you for joining us today. Really, this has been such a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and we hope to continue hosting more of these Talk Landscape live streams with you. And today we explore how forests can benefit cities. They can help us become more resilient to extreme weather events. They can improve our mental health. They can help us connect with each other and with ourselves. And if you want to learn a little bit more on the benefits of forests and how we can really help them thrive, to continue to connect with nature and to harness these benefits in the future, I would like to invite you for our hybrid conference called GLF Forests, happening in Bonn, Germany, and online on the 24th and 25th of April. This event will host key sessions, discussions. It will have various speakers. It will have interviews, networking options for everyone joining us online on how we can define the next decade of action to protect, restore, and preserve forests. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you in the next Talk Landscape. And of course, we hope to see you at GLF Forests. This was just the beginning. We'll be back with more Talk Landscape episodes soon. So let's continue this conversation on social. Tag us at the Global Landscapes Forum on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Thanks so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
What if we told you that one of the biggest climate solutions is right in front of us? Forests. They store carbon, protect biodiversity, and sustain millions of lives. But they're under threat like never before. And the choices we make today will shape the next decade and beyond. So, what's next? On April 24, GLF Forests will bring together scientists, indigenous leaders, policymakers, and everyday changemakers to take real action for our forests. Learn from groundbreaking research and on-the-ground experience. Connect with hundreds around the world working on real solutions, and turn great ideas into action. This is more than just a conference. It's a call to action. Join the movement. Join GLF Forests.